they've got to weigh up all these things. But I do think, the excitement factor worked. The fact that there was the game that would have the most people in would be the Saturday middle game. That's normally the case because you've got the people coming in for the later game, which was the best attended game for their two fan bases. And then you've got people hanging around from the first game, and then, all the people like us who want to watch all the games anyway, kind of thing. And it was an important game, and we all got to watch, effectively, Catalans win a final, in a way, because it was it was a winner trophy game for them, which worked really well. That helped be absolutely, I think, class for that aspect. Even though they didn't lift the trophy then, I think it's totally right that they go and lift it in front of their own fans in France next week. But yeah, that was a great point to it. I think the crowd was quite positive, wasn't it, that number?
I think it was. I think it isn't actually that much down on what it has been in recent years. One thing I noticed with the crowd is normally in between matches there's a lot of movement. So it seems to be two things actually with the crowd. But firstly, whichever match is on, their fans sort of move towards the centre behind the sticks. And whoever had been there before, sort of, I guess they all go off for a drink or to get some food or the toilet, and then they sort of dissipate a bit further round. And that seemed to be the flow for the Magic weekends I've been to before. Whereas this one, you had your seat and you were sat there for the weekend, or at least for the day. I don't know.
I think it was a lot.
For the stands.
It seemed pretty noticeable. It was a very mixed kind of situation around me, and on this Sunday I noticed more people just staying for their team's game. Certainly the Warrington fans that were in our stand just stayed for their game. But on the Saturday around us, it seemed to be the same people there most of the day. Watched some of all of the games. Maybe not sat through all of the games, but it seemed, looking at the ends, that they just emptied out completely and then filled up. So it was like there was a lot of people who only watched their team's games, it almost felt like. But maybe you notice people coming back in but sitting somewhere totally different, and that might have been, I don't know. But yeah, it did feel like that's the one thing that I just wish we could find a way to encourage the fans to watch more than just their team's game. Because then we'll have more full seats. It'll look better on television and sound better on television, I think. But there you go. That's the downside of the upside of Newcastle Stadium being in the city centre and having that great nightlife after the game, the great options for food before the games and after the games as well, and all that sort of stuff. So you got to take the rough with the smooth. And Newcastle's far fucking better than Anfield. I'll say that for certain.
Yeah. What would you keep the timings as they were?
The kickoff times?
Yeah.
Well, obviously the last game on Saturday got pushed back because of the events of the game before in the Sammy Soni Lange injury. So 8 o'clock was certainly too late. I didn't realise they were that much later than normally before. So that when you guys started talking about that in the morning, I was like, I didn't understand. I didn't realise that had happened. But yeah, I sort of think 7 o'clock kickoff time for the last game is probably better. But when you're travelling on the day, for us, it meant I didn't have to get up stupidly early on the Saturday.
Yeah.
If I'm honest. The Sunday's fine. I think 1 o'clock, you don't want to be kicking off really any earlier than 1 o'clock.
No,
maybe half 12
Sunday,
at the absolute
I do wonder whether at least bring it forward to 2. Just gives you an hour at the other end for, if you're going out, it gives you an hour to...
It does. I think we still only got back to the hotel at about 1:30, so we still had a good 3.5 to 4 hours out after the game. So
yeah, or for people that because a lot of people have to travel to get to their hotels.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
I mean, we had a half-hour walk, so.
Yeah, I think a little bit earlier on the Saturday certainly wouldn't be an issue, would it? I'm not sure what the choices were for there, but once we were in the games, I didn't really think about it. I don't know. I was probably 8 pints in by the end of the half time of your game, Sarah. So
yeah.
Right, a couple of our friend Neil's fact checks before we get into the news. So, Aaron Moore, we talked about him last week. He was praised by Sam Tompkins, wasn't he? We weren't quite sure when his first Super League game was. Couldn't figure that out from my stats. I'd obviously had a blip there, but Neil said the Catalans League game was his second Super League match. His first was Leeds v Lee. Clearly, as Lee lost both these games, he has an anti-Lee agenda, and all Centurions fans need to start complaining about this ASAP.
Definitely.
And also,
I'm sure all of our Lee listeners will get onto that.
There you go. Yeah. I was speaking to a couple of Lee fans that were nice lads before before we got in the gates on Sunday lunchtime, but I didn't mention the podcast because it's got Super League in it and in the title, and they aren't. So, from that same Catalans League game, Neil talked about double first half hat tricks because we'd asked the question last week: had that ever happened before? Two players scoring hat tricks for the same team in the same half of a game, and Neil said, "Well, it was a bugger to check, but I can confirm that Yaha and McMeekin did create Super League history in both scoring first half hat tricks for Catalans against Lee. Teams have had two or more players scored hat tricks in the same game on 58 occasions, but this is the first time two players from the same team have managed it in the first half." So there you go. History falling all over the place for the Catalans at the moment.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, that is our longer than usual opening of the show. I hope you enjoyed our Magic Weekend stories. Share some of yours and we can talk about them on next week's show. But what we're going to do now is move into the news. Right, so broke today the biggest news story I think in the last week. So we'll talk about that first, Sarah. It's not on your rundown because it broke today, so I'll have to talk us through it, and then we'll chat a little bit about it and go through the fan views we've had on it as well. But the news is sad, worrying, not surprising, lots of different ways to look at it, but Championship side London Broncos will move to being a part-time side for the 2022 season onwards as they prepare for a reduced central funding distributions. Broncos have been running as a full-time operation despite relegation from Super League in 2019, and in fact, after relegation in 2014 as well, they continued to run some full-time. The club parted company with coach Danny Ward this season as hopes of a top flight return did not materialise, and Super League's reduced television deal has meant a smaller drip down amount of money to the lower divisions to share out. From what has previously been a total of 40 million divided between the Super League and a chunk then sent down to the RFL and the Championship and League One, from 2022 it's believed to be, well, the BBC say closer to 25 to 30 million, but Wigan's fan forum, Lenigan said it's 24 million a year. So from that, Super League interim chairman Ken Davey says about 5 million will be handed to the Rugby Football League, who will filter the funds through to Championship and League One clubs. In a statement, the Broncos said, "Financially, the club will be receiving a vastly reduced central distribution in 2022, and we have had to make changes to offset this reduction, which has led to the decision that has been taken by the club. The London Broncos will increase the level of financial input into our highly successful academy and scholarship programme, as well as work with the community game in London and the South East to continue to develop professional rugby league players as we take the opportunity to restructure the club ahead of our planned move to Plough Lane in 2022. Off the field, a huge amount of work has been undertaken in several areas to ensure that rugby league in London continues to thrive and that the Broncos are able to return stronger for a promotion push in seasons to come, with a squad littered with homegrown players and a solid supporter base in our new home." So, London are no longer a full-time operation. What sort of your initial reactions to that news, Sarah?
It's sad. It feels in one sense a little bit defeatist, not in terms of, but in in terms of like, well, almost like that's it. We can't, what are they working towards? But on the other hand, they've got to be sustainable financially, haven't they? So if that's the way to be financially sustainable, then they've got to do it rather than doing, a Bradford or a Widnes or, any of these other teams who have chosen to overspend in the hope that they're going to get promotion next year.
Yeah.
I think that's probably my feeling on it.
Yeah, certainly. We've had some fan views. Tom Andrews said, sad, but somewhat expected. In a city of 9.5 million, only getting 1,000 or so fans isn't sustainable as a full-time project. Need 10 years at one location to build a proper fan base. Carsten said, to be expected with the decline in central funding, if they ever decide how much it will be, clubs have to adjust their budgets. Ian Gatwood, London fan, of course, someone we used to hear from a lot when London were in the Super League. Ian said, not in any way surprised if I'm honest. As a follower of the club from day one when Fulham played Wigan, I've seen the highs and lows, and this is another setback for the club. I don't think we will be the only club in this precarious state. London as a club has produced so many quality players from the capital that have gone on to higher things, and it would be a massive shame if London were no longer to be around. And Lee Whitnell said, sad news, undoubtedly exacerbated by COVID, but more evidence, if it were needed, that promotion and relegation does not and cannot work in rugby league. Great that they will continue to focus on the academy. The potential talent pool is too big down there for us to let that drop off after so much good work. Yeah, and I think for me, the emphasis they put in their statement that, you know, they're going to keep putting money into the scholarship and academy, and in fact increase the support they give at that level, shows that there's one club here with that haven't got self-interest in mind, sort of thing. They've got the sport, the wider sport in mind, because they're prepared to create and develop players that they know for at least a period ahead of them now will not fulfill their potential at the London Broncos. They will have to go beyond the London Broncos to fulfill their potential. But I think that's a real positive thing that they're still going to do that, because it is massively important. We don't have too many areas where participation's growing in all sports, let alone just our sport. But in our sport, you know, the northeast and the southeast are two areas where we are seeing, even though they are from small bases from a small starting point, we are seeing increases there and progress. And you know, one of the most exciting players in the last month or so of Super League coming through has been Kai Pearce-Paul, who's come through the Broncos academy system, come from the southeast, and is now, you know, looking like one of the few bright spots on a pretty miserable patch in the Wigan season. You know, last week we talked about Lewis McCarthy extending his stay in St Helens. You know, and there's lots of players around that have come through that London system. So positive that remains. It's just realism, innit?
Yeah.
If this is a way to make sure they stick around for a bit and they can build a fan base in a location, then maybe they can see a point where they can go full time again in, say, 3, 5, 10 years, what have you. And then it's all been worth it, hasn't it, I suppose? Yeah,
and I think, you know, as much as I don't like to do it, I agree with Tom. You know, they need to find a home and stick there.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Tom made some really good points there.
You know, you can't be nomadic, especially in a region as large as London, because it's just too difficult. People travelling. And it's very difficult to build up, you know, relationships with the local schools or whatever, because whatever input you're putting into, the schools around the stadium, if you're then moving, you know, to another area of the city, those kids aren't going to be travelling.
Yeah, and every gain you see is offset by a loss each time you sort of move, and then what you end up as well seeing is people who've been around for years who've kind of stuck with you a bit get a bit fed up of it too.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully, you know, there's positive times ahead despite this sad and disappointing move. Let's move on to sort of running through some Super League signings and re-signings and releases and that sort of stuff. Sarah, do you want to start with what St Helens have been doing this week?
Yes, the Saints have signed forward Curtis Saronen from Manly Sea Eagles on a 2-year deal from 2022 with the option for a third. The 28-year-old back rower has made 130 NRL appearances for West Tigers and Manly since making his first team debut back in 2012. Saronen is effectively a direct replacement for Joel Thompson, who has announced he will retire at the end of the season.